She was sitting alone at the mating ceremony until the Alpha King walked to her and marked her. The moon hung low over the fortress, casting silver light across the stone walls and the sprawling courtyard below. Wolves howled in the distance, their cries carrying on the cold wind. Inside the great hall, torches burned bright, painting flickering shadows across banners of deep crimson and black. The annual mating ceremony had begun, a night where power, desire, and destiny collided in a ritual older than memory. Among the gathered crowd she sat alone. Her hair, the color of midnight, fell loosely over her shoulders. Her dress was simple, far different from the rich fabrics of the other women. Eyes glanced her way, some with curiosity, most with disdain. She was an Omega, quiet and overlooked by the pack. Her heart thumped in her chest as she felt the weight of every judgmental gaze. She did not belong here, or at least, she had always believed she did not. The hall fell silent as the Alpha King entered. Every head turned. He was a figure carved from shadow and command, moving with a grace that was both terrifying and magnetic. His dark eyes scanned the assembly, sharp and calculating. Those who met his gaze felt exposed, as if their souls were laid bare for judgment. Yet among the hundreds present, his eyes settled on her. She stiffened. Surely he could not mean her. She was nothing, a solitary shadow at the edge of the gathering, and yet he moved unhurried toward her. The crowd whispered, a ripple of tension spreading through the hall. Women of noble blood tensed, men of high rank shifted uneasily, but the king's stride never faltered. When he reached her, he stopped. The room seemed to hold its breath. He looked down at her, and for the first time her fear was matched by an unfamiliar feeling, a spark of hope, wild and dangerous. He raised a hand, his fingers brushing lightly against her cheek. The touch was both gentle and possessive, a declaration of intent that left no room for doubt. The Alpha King marked her, not in haste, not with cruelty, but with a deliberate, commanding grace that made her knees weak. A symbol burned briefly on her wrist, glowing with a faint, mystical light. The hall gasped. Whispers surged like a rising tide. No one had expected this. And Omega alone, unnoticed until now, had been claimed by the king himself. Her heart raced. Fear, yes, but also exhilaration. Her life, once small and hidden, now belonged to something vast, something dangerous. She could see the surprise in the eyes around her, the shock of those who thought themselves untouchable. And yet in the king's gaze there was something else, something she could not name. A recognition, a silent acknowledgement of strength she had never seen in herself. The king spoke, his voice low but carrying across the hall. "She is mine." The simplicity of the words carried the weight of mountains. The assembly shifted uncomfortably. Some bowed their heads in respect, others in fear. A few exchanged glances, silently plotting. But she, for the first time, felt seen, truly seen. Even as the ceremony continued around them, she could not tear her eyes away from him. His presence was overwhelming, magnetic, like a force that pulled at the corners of her mind. She wanted to flee, to hide, but her body would not obey. She was rooted in place, caught between terror and fascination. As the night wore on, the rituals of the mating ceremony unfolded. The air was thick with incense, smoke curling toward the vaulted ceiling like ghostly fingers. Music played softly, a haunting melody that seemed older than time. Others moved about, pairing with one another, forming alliances and pledges. She remained at the king's side, invisible and invincible all at once. It was in the quiet moments, when he leaned close to speak words meant only for her, that she began to understand the depth of what had happened. "Do not fear them," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. "Fear only your own hesitation." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to step into the life he offered, even though it was terrifying. And yet, a whisper of doubt lingered in her mind. Why her? Among all the women of the pack, why had he chosen her? What did it mean to be marked by the Alpha King, a man feared by all, respected by none, and whispered about in the shadows? The night pressed on. Torches burned lower, and the first hint of dawn threatened the edges of the horizon. But the ceremony had not yet ended. The king's eyes never left her, and in that gaze, she felt both trapped and freed. She understood that this moment was the beginning of something far larger than herself, something that could reshape not only her life but the very balance of the pack. Suddenly, a distant howl shattered the quiet, sharp and urgent. The crowd stiffened, sensing the warning carried in the sound. The king's hand tightened around hers, a silent reassurance but also a command. Danger was near. Something was coming that would test them both, and the world outside the hall seemed suddenly alive with threat. She swallowed hard, feeling the pulse of fear and excitement intertwine. She had entered this night as a solitary shadow, unnoticed and dismissed. She would leave it as something else entirely, marked, claimed, and chosen. But even as she felt the warmth of the king's presence, she realized with a jolt that she had no idea what she had stepped into. And then, just as the hall seemed to hold its breath once more, the king's eyes darkened. He moved closer, his voice a low rumble meant only for her. "You must be ready," he said, "because nothing will be the same again." A shiver ran down her spine. Her heart pounded in her chest as the weight of those words settled over her. She wanted to ask what he meant, but the words died in her throat. All she could do was nod, aware that her life had already changed, and that the night, the ceremony, and the king's mark were only the beginning. The hall erupted in whispers again, but she no longer noticed. Her gaze remained locked on him. She had been chosen, marked, and drawn into a world of shadows, power, and destiny. And as the torches flickered and the first light of dawn crept across the stone floor, she realized one thing with absolute clarity. Her life would never be her own again. The first part of her story had ended, but the true test, the journey that would shape her soul, was only beginning. The fortress seemed quieter after the mating ceremony, yet the air was thick with tension. Outside, the wind whistled through the towers, carrying whispers of the night's events. Inside, torches flickered along stone corridors, casting moving shadows that made the walls seem alive. She walked behind the Alpha King, her steps careful and uncertain. The hall was empty, yet every creak of the floor made her heart beat faster. He led her to a chamber at the top of the tallest tower. The room was unlike any she had seen before. Rich tapestries lined the walls, depicting battles and victories of past Alpha Kings. Weapons and trophies glimmered faintly in the torchlight. A large window overlooked the forest, the moonlight painting silver patterns on the stone floor. She had expected luxury, but this place felt more like a throne of shadows, a room of power and secrets. The king turned to face her, his eyes unreadable in the dim light. "You are marked now," he said quietly, "but marking is only the first step. Being chosen carries responsibility, danger, and expectation." She swallowed. I do not understand." "Why me?" Her voice was small, almost lost in the weight of his presence. He studied her for a long moment. "Because you are different. You see the world as it is, not as others tell you to see it. That is rare among Omegas, and rare things are needed in rare times." She wanted to believe him, but doubt lingered in her chest. She had spent her whole life invisible, unwanted, and overlooked. Now she was claimed by the most powerful figure in the pack, and the attention was terrifying. He stepped closer. His presence was magnetic, almost overwhelming. "There will be challenges," he continued. "The pack will question you, rivals will test you, and there is something more, a shadow over us, one that seeks to bend fate to its will." She shivered. "A shadow?" His expression darkened. "A curse, one that has lingered over my bloodline for centuries. Some say it is broken only by those who can walk between fear and courage, weakness and strength. You may be that one." Her stomach twisted. A curse. She had not imagined the depth of what she had stepped into. And yet beneath the fear a strange thrill stirred. She had always been small, hidden, overlooked, and now she might be capable of something extraordinary. The king reached out and took her hand. His touch was firm, grounding, yet gentle. "You must trust me," he said. "Not because I command it, but because our paths are now linked. Your strength and your courage will define us both." She nodded, though the knot of anxiety in her chest did not loosen. She wanted to trust him. She wanted to believe that she could step into the life he offered. And yet every instinct whispered caution. Days passed. The fortress became both a sanctuary and a prison. She learned the rhythms of the pack, the unspoken rules of power, and the delicate dance of loyalty and fear. Some approached her with curiosity, others with contempt. She felt the sharp edge of envy, the whispered threats of rivals, and the watchful eyes of those who coveted the king's attention. Through it all, he was present, not always in sight, but always in influence. His approval was rare, but when it came, it shone like sunlight breaking through clouds. Their conversations were few but meaningful. In quiet moments, he spoke of strategy, history, and the burdens of leadership. He spoke not as a teacher, but as someone sharing the weight of a world that few could understand. She began to notice the subtle changes in herself. Her fear lessened, replaced by a cautious confidence. She learned to hold her head high, to meet the gaze of others without flinching. The mark on her wrist pulsed faintly, a constant reminder that she was no longer merely an observer. She was part of something larger, something powerful. One evening, under the glow of a blood-red moon, the king called her to the highest balcony. The forest stretched endlessly below, shadows twisting like living things. He turned to her, his face serious, almost vulnerable. "The curse," he said, "was not placed lightly. It binds not only my blood but the fate of the pack itself. If it remains, it will bring suffering to all. If it is broken, there is power beyond imagination, but the cost may be greater than either of us can bear." She felt the weight of his words settle over her. Her pulse quickened. The night felt alive, charged with something ancient and potent. "And you think I can break it?" she whispered, unsure of her own courage. "I do not know," he admitted, "but I know that you are unlike anyone I have ever met. You have the strength hidden beneath your fear, and strength like that is needed." The wind whipped through the balcony, and for a moment they were silent, two figures standing against the night. The bond between them, forged in public and now deepening in private, hummed with tension. It was more than desire, more than obligation. It was a connection that neither fully understood but both felt with startling clarity. Suddenly, a howl echoed through the forest. It was closer this time, sharper, and filled with an urgency that made the blood in her veins freeze. The king's eyes darkened, and he moved instinctively, stepping in front of her. "They are coming," he said, his voice low but urgent. "The curse has agents, forces that will try to stop us before we even begin." Her heart raced. "What do we do?" He looked down at her, and in that glance she saw something rare, a flicker of vulnerability, a silent plea for trust. "We face them," he said, "together. And you must be ready, because once we step into this path, there is no turning back." The wind carried the sound of movement from below. Shadows shifted in the trees, glimpses of figures darting just beyond the light. The king's hand brushed hers, a silent reassurance and command all at once. She felt a surge of fear, but also a strange courage. She had been marked by the Alpha King, claimed for a destiny she barely understood, and now the first test had arrived. "You must not falter," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of command. "Your strength will be needed in ways you cannot yet imagine." Her stomach nodded, but she held his gaze. I will try." He nodded, and for a moment the world seemed to narrow to just the two of them. The blood-red moon cast its light over their faces, highlighting the seriousness in his eyes and the determination in hers. In that moment, she understood something she had never felt before. She was no longer alone. She was part of a bond, dangerous and powerful, that would test every part of her being. A sudden rustle in the forest below drew their attention. Shadows moved with unnatural speed, and she realized that the danger was closer than they had thought. Her pulse quickened, but she did not step back. The king's presence steadied her, gave her courage she had never known. He placed a hand on her shoulder, firm and commanding. "Do you trust me?" he asked. She nodded, her voice steady despite the fear curling in her chest. "Yes." "Good," he said, "because whatever comes next, we face it together, and there is no room for hesitation." The forest seemed to hold its breath, the night itself waiting. And then from the shadows, a figure emerged, silent, menacing, and unlike any human she had ever seen. Its eyes glowed faintly in the darkness, and the mark of the curse seemed to shimmer in its presence. The king moved in front of her, body tense, every muscle ready. "Stand behind me," he commanded, and she obeyed, heart pounding. The creature stepped closer, and for the first time she understood that the world she had entered was not only dangerous, it was alive with forces she could not yet name. The night, the king, the curse, all of it pressed in around her, and she realized with a jolt that this was only the beginning. Her life had changed at the mating ceremony. But now, standing on the balcony with the king, facing the first hint of the curse's agents, she understood that the trials were only beginning. She was marked, she was chosen, and she was no longer invisible. But whether she would survive, whether she would grow strong enough to face what lay ahead, that was a question only the night and the curse could answer. The figure advanced. The king's eyes never left hers. And in that instant she knew. Everything had changed and there would be no turning back. The forest stretched endlessly before them, a sea of blackened trunks and twisting shadows. The moon hung low, a silver eye that barely pierced the dense canopy. Every step was uncertain, the ground soft with moss and hidden roots, each sound amplified in the stillness. She walked beside the Alpha King, her hand brushing his arm, feeling the quiet strength that radiated from him. "This forest," he said, his voice low, "has been cursed for centuries. It tests those who enter, shaping the weak and breaking the foolish." She shivered, not from the cold but from the weight of his words. "And us?" she asked. "What if it tests us?" He looked down at her, his dark eyes serious. "Then we must pass or fail together. Fear is natural, but hesitation can be deadly." They moved in silence. Every rustle of leaves, every distant howl made her heart pound. Yet with each step she felt a strange awakening. The mark on her wrist pulsed faintly, as though reacting to the forest itself. A warmth spread through her chest, a small ember of courage that made her hold her head higher. She was not just following him. She was learning to walk beside him as an equal, though the weight of the Alpha's presence was still overwhelming. Suddenly, the path split. One route led into a dark thicket, the other along a narrow ridge overlooking a deep ravine. The air shimmered unnaturally and shadows seemed to stretch and twist. She hesitated, but the king's hand on her shoulder steadied her. "We must choose," he said, "and the forest will notice our choice." She swallowed, trusting him, and nodded. "Then we take the ridge." As they moved along the narrow path, the wind picked up, carrying whispers that seemed almost human. Shapes flickered in the darkness, eyes glowing faintly, figures darting just beyond the torchlight. She clutched the edge of his cloak, her pulse racing. "Do not be afraid," he said. "The forest can sense doubt. Strength is in calm, not panic." She tried to calm her thoughts, to steady her fear, but the forest was relentless. Branches reached like hands, tripping them, slowing their progress. Shadows shifted and whispered in voices she could almost understand. She realized with a start that this was more than a physical trial. It was a test of mind and heart. Hours passed. They encountered illusions that played on their deepest fears. She saw visions of failure, of the king turning away, of the pack rejecting her. Each vision made her knees weak, her stomach churn. And yet, with his steady presence, she learned to resist the fear, to see the illusions for what they were. "You are stronger than you know," the king said softly, his voice a tether to reality. "Fear is only a shadow. Courage is what remains when you face it." She nodded, her heart swelling with a strange pride. For the first time she felt capable, not just chosen. She could face the forest. She could face the curse. She could face him, but the forest was not done testing them. From the shadows, a creature emerged, tall and wiry, with eyes that glowed like embers. It moved with unnatural speed, and its voice was a whisper that carried in her mind. "You do not belong," it hissed. "You are weak. You cannot break the curse." The king stepped forward, placing himself between her and the creature. "You will not harm her," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Leave now." The creature laughed, a sound like dry leaves scraping stone. "You cannot protect her, not from what is coming." It lunged. The king met it with strength and skill, moving with precision born of years of battle. She watched, her heart hammering, but something inside her shifted. The mark on her wrist glowed brighter, a warmth that spread through her fingers and up her arm. Instinctively, she raised her hand. A force pulsed outward, a wave of energy that made the creature stumble back, hissing in shock. She felt a thrill of power, a surge of strength she had never known. The king's eyes widened, not in fear but in recognition. "You," he said, breathless, "you have the gift. You are not just marked, you are part of the curse and part of its undoing." Her chest heaved. "I don't understand," she whispered. "How can I—" "You will learn," he said, stepping closer. "And I will teach you, but we must move. There are more trials ahead." They continued, deeper into the forest. The path became treacherous, rivers with black water, cliffs with jagged edges, and trees that seemed to close in around them. Every step was a test of balance, courage, and trust. She stumbled once and he caught her, holding her close for a heartbeat longer than necessary. She felt warmth and a flutter in her chest, but she did not pull away. "I am not just a shadow," she said quietly, more to herself than to him. "I am part of this." He did not speak, but the faintest curve of his lips suggested acknowledgement. And for the first time she felt it, not fear of him, not awe, but partnership. She was learning to stand beside him, not behind him. Night deepened. They reached a clearing where the moonlight fell in silver streams. The forest was silent here, almost unnaturally so. And then she saw it, a stone pedestal, carved with ancient runes, glowing faintly with a light that seemed older than time itself. The king knelt beside it. "This is a test of spirit," he explained. "To break the curse, you must face it not as yourself, but as the strength within you. The pedestal will show you what you fear most and what you desire most." Her stomach twisted. "And if I fail?" "Then we both suffer," he said, his voice soft but grave. "But I believe you will not fail, not now, not ever." She stepped forward, placing her hand on the pedestal. Instantly, a vision consumed her mind. She saw herself alone, rejected, powerless. She saw the king lost, consumed by shadow and rage. She felt every doubt she had ever carried, every moment she had felt small and unworthy. And then, she saw herself standing tall beside him, fearless and strong. The pack bowed in respect, the curse unraveling, shadows fleeing before the light she carried. She felt the power of the mark flow through her, solid and warm, a part of her as natural as her heartbeat. She gasped, pulling back. The king reached for her hand, steadying her. "You see it now," he said. "Your strength is real, your courage is real. You are no longer just chosen, you are the one who can change this fate." Before she could speak, a shout rang from the edge of the clearing. Shadows moved. Another figure, tall, cloaked in black, eyes glowing with unnatural light, appeared at the tree line. The forest seemed to hold its breath as the figure stepped forward, and she realized that the trials were far from over. The king drew close, his hand on her shoulder, eyes fierce. "Stay behind me," he commanded. "But know this, you are stronger than any shadow that comes for us. Together, we will face it." Her chest heaved with a mix of fear and determination. She was no longer the timid Omega, no longer the girl who had sat alone at the mating ceremony. She was marked, powerful, and ready to face the curse that had haunted the Alpha King for centuries. And for the first time, she felt truly alive. The shadow figure advanced, and the air shimmered with ancient magic. She could feel the pulse of the forest, the heartbeat of the curse, and the strength of her own mark. The night stretched endlessly, full of danger, mystery, and the promise of transformation. Her hand found the king's, and he squeezed it. "Together," he said. "Together," she echoed. The figure stepped closer, the forest dark around them, and in that moment she understood one undeniable truth. The trials of heart and shadow were only beginning, and their journey into the depths of the curse would change everything. The ruins lay beneath a sky painted blood-red by the eclipse. Stone pillars jutted from the earth like broken teeth, cracked and worn by centuries. Shadows stretched across the ground, twisting unnaturally, as if alive. The air thrummed with magic, ancient and dangerous, carrying whispers that crawled into the mind. The forest behind them had ended. Here, only silence awaited, thick, expectant, and heavy. She stood beside the Alpha King, her hand brushing his. The mark on her wrist pulsed, strong and steady, as if aware of the power that surrounded them. Her heart raced, not just with fear, but with a fierce determination she had never known. She was no longer the timid Omega who had sat alone at the mating ceremony. She was chosen, marked, and she had grown stronger than even she had imagined. The king's eyes scanned the ruins, sharp and calculating. "This is where it began," he said, voice low. "This is where the curse took root, and this is where it must end." She nodded, taking a deep breath. "Then let's end it." They stepped forward together into the heart of the ruins. The ground was uneven, broken stones threatening to trip them, and the air was thick with the echoes of the past. Whispers swirled around them, voices that spoke of fear, betrayal, and despair. She felt her courage falter for a moment, but then his hand found hers, strong and grounding, and she drew strength from him. "You are ready," he said. "Trust in yourself and trust in us." She met his gaze. "I trust you," she said, feeling the words like a promise. The shadowy figure they had encountered in the cursed forest stepped from the ruins, its eyes glowing like coals. Its form shimmered, dark and terrifying. The energy around it pulsed, heavy and oppressive. She felt a shiver run through her body, the presence of the curse, alive and aware. "You think you can break me?" the figure hissed, its voice echoing in the ruins. "You are nothing but pawns." The king stepped forward, body tense, muscles coiled for battle. "We are not pawns. We are the end of your reign." The figure laughed, a sound that carried like dry wind over stone. "Then come, face the power you cannot comprehend." She felt the pull of fear, the temptation to flee, but the warmth of the mark on her wrist flared. Strength surged through her, steady and real. She realized that the power was hers too. The curse had chosen her as much as it had tested her, and now she had the chance to shape its end. The battle began. Shadows whipped around them, ancient magic clashing with the strength of the king and the courage she carried. He fought with precision and ferocity, moving as if the shadows themselves were nothing more than obstacles to be cut through. She watched, then stepped forward, letting the pulse of her mark guide her. Energy radiated from her, pushing back the darkness, forcing the shadowy figure to stagger. Together, they moved in harmony. His strength and skill, her courage and emerging power, they were a force neither the curse nor the shadows could break. Every step, every movement, tested their trust, their bond, and their resolve. The figure lashed out with tendrils of shadow, striking at her. She faltered for a heartbeat, but then she remembered the forest, the pedestal, the trials she had survived. She lifted her hand and the mark blazed like a beacon. Light radiated outward and the shadow recoiled, screeching as it staggered back. The king's voice rang in her ears. "Now, together." They advanced, side by side. His strength and her light intertwined, wrapping around the shadow, pressing it into the ruins. The ancient magic of the curse roared in resistance, but it could not withstand the bond they had forged, the trust, courage, and unspoken connection between them. And then with a final surge, the shadow screamed, a sound that echoed through the ruins and shattered into nothingness. The eclipse passed, the sky lightening as the first rays of dawn touched the ruins. Silence fell, heavy but peaceful. The curse was broken. She sank to her knees, chest heaving, tears of exhaustion and relief streaming down her face. The king knelt beside her, his hand on her shoulder, eyes soft for the first time she had ever seen. "You did it," he said quietly. "We did it." She looked up at him, feeling the weight of everything they had faced, the fear, the trials, the shadows. I couldn't have done it alone," she said. He smiled faintly, a rare, gentle expression. "No one can, but together, we are stronger than any darkness." The ruins seemed to breathe around them, the shadows retreating, the air lighter, the weight of centuries lifted. She felt herself changing, growing, no longer timid or small. She was powerful, chosen, and she had earned her place, not just beside the Alpha King, but as a part of the destiny they had forged together. As they rose, he took her hand fully in his. "The pack will see you now," he said. "Not as an Omega, not as someone small, but as the one who helped end the curse. Your strength is yours. Own it." She nodded, feeling a surge of pride and clarity. She understood now that being marked was not a sentence or a burden. It was a gift, a responsibility, and a chance to grow beyond fear. The journey back to the fortress was quiet. The forest seemed less menacing, the shadows less oppressive. She walked beside the king, no longer behind him, no longer small. They were equals in power, trust, and bond. When they returned, the pack watched in awe. Whispers spread, stories of the Omega who had walked into darkness and emerged strong, the Alpha King who had chosen wisely, and the curse that had finally been broken. Respect replaced fear and disdain. She felt their gazes, but they no longer carried judgment. Instead, they carried acknowledgement, the recognition of courage and strength. In the quiet of the fortress, away from all eyes, she looked at the king. "What happens now?" she asked. He studied her for a moment, then smiled, the weight of command softening. "Now we rebuild. We lead, and we remain together whatever comes." She felt a flutter of warmth, the connection between them deepening beyond fear or obligation. "Together," she echoed. The dawn broke over the horizon, the first light spilling across the fortress and the land beyond. Shadows faded and the world seemed new. She felt it in her chest, a heartbeat steady, strong, full of life. She had walked through darkness and returned stronger. She had faced trials, danger, and fear, and she had discovered her own power, her courage, and her place in a world that had once seemed too vast to enter. The king placed a hand on her shoulder, firm and grounding. "You have changed," he said softly. "But not just you, I have changed too. The curse may be gone, but what we face together has left its mark on both of us, and it is a mark of strength, not shadow." She nodded, feeling the truth of his words. They had walked through fire and shadow together, and their bond was unbreakable. The fortress, the pack, the world, they would all see the result of their journey. And yet, in the quiet between them, she realized something else. The story was not just about curses or trials. It was about trust, courage, and love. About finding strength in unexpected places and discovering that the heart could be as powerful as any magic or mark. As the sun rose fully, lighting the land with gold, she felt a sense of peace she had never known. The fear, the doubt, the trials, they were behind her. Ahead lay a future she could shape, beside the man who had chosen her, beside the king who had trusted her strength. She looked at him and he looked at her. Words were not needed. In their silence, there was understanding, trust, and the quiet promise of all that they would face together. The ruins behind them, the forest at their backs, the mark glowing faintly on her wrist. Everything spoke of endings and beginnings, of redemption earned, and of a bond forged in fire and shadow. She had walked alone into the darkness and emerged transformed, marked by destiny and strengthened by courage. And at that moment, as the world began anew beneath the light of the rising sun, she knew she was no longer alone. She was never truly alone again. The journey had ended, but their story of trust, courage, and love would live on in the hearts of all who witnessed it.